connection directly to China tonight. And of all the contributions of Taiwan to the United States, supreme among them is Kai-Fu Lee, who's contributed much of the speech recognition capabilities of Apple Computer and spread throughout our systems. He immigrated to Tennessee in 1973, and then he went to a whole series of U.S. universities in Columbia and Carnegie Mellon and became a professor and went on ultimately from Apple to Microsoft to Google China, and he was so vital that he prompted a major litigation to see who could gain his great capabilities. And now he's head of Sinovation Partners in China, and he epitomizes the kind of interplay between the U.S. and China, I think, that's been so fruitful over the years for both countries. And welcome Kai-Fu Lee. And you got your book on every table here.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to speak here. So my understanding is that I'll give about a 15-20-minute speech on the future of AI, and then we'll take some questions. Is that right?
That is correct. That is correct. Go ahead.
No problem. Thank you. Yeah. So I hope you will really enjoy the book that's on your desk, on your table. And the book is actually a very innovative approach. It's a fictional book with 10 stories that represent my thoughts about what the future world looks like. But of course, not written by me, because I don't write fiction. It's written by a well-known science fiction writer, with me explaining some of the key concepts in the stories about what technologies will become mature, how they'll change the world. Because the world changes a lot in 20 years. We often overestimate what technologies can do in 2 or 3 years, but definitely underestimate in 10 or 20 years. But in this talk, I'm not going to tell you about stories. I'm going to give some of the top technological changes that I think will happen around AI. And so they're from the book, but it's described differently. Firstly, AI is actually misunderstood by some people. It is not really a replica of the human brain. It works very differently. AI is very good, but requires a huge amount of data in order to optimize numerically and quantitatively, and it can individualize each person and give that person something totally different. And that's why TikTok and YouTube and Facebook are so good at targeting us. But it is very poor currently on abstraction, analysis, common sense, insight, creativity, and of course it has no self-awareness, consciousness, or emotions or love. So it is actually quite a good complement for human beings, because we're not good at what it's good at, and it's not very good at what we're good at. So I'm going to talk about 6 trends that I think will be really big in the next 20 years. First is that just as AI has beaten people in computer vision, seen on the top row, starting in 2011, we saw this big jump of computers' ability to recognize objects. And now it's been beating people the last 7 years. And that's why we see this proliferation of applications, from good and bad things, right? The fun animations, and then the not so fun deep fakes, also image recognition and the controversial face recognition, also visual inspection in manufacturing, and then beating people in reading radiology, MRI reports, and of course, autonomous vehicles. And we at Sinovation was fortunate in seeing this phenomenon back in 2011 and having made our first computer vision investment And then that proliferated into about 7 unicorns that we've invested in. So I'm happy to tell you something equally exciting is happening now in the area of natural language. That is the understanding of the human text and speech. And a similar event happened starting 2018. Lower graph shows a dramatic acceleration in improvement of natural language due to a certain set of technologies now beating human, and that's going to power much more capable speech recognition. It will give us simultaneous machine translation, a little ear set you can wear. AI will be able to not search for websites, but answer questions on the internet. Google already has some of that. And also on the flip side, the advertising will be so good that is no longer Cambridge Analytica targeting 5 psychometric types. It's going to be each of us targeted with our background precisely in advertising. So all these are commercial opportunities that we see. It will eventually basically lead to treating text not as data, not as information, but as knowledge and insights. And it will open up many applications. Read the book for more details. The second huge area is the future of transportation. We at Sinovation are huge investors in autonomous vehicles, and our investment thesis is really 2 things. On the left side is our belief that we start from simple environments, collect lots of data, and make it improve, and make sure you've got a OTA capability to continue to collect data everywhere and update, because AI just gets better with data. Tesla's features is a great example. Tesla is a very poorly endowed car that doesn't have many advanced sensors, but because it collects so much data from so many vehicles, it actually does a decent job in its autopilot as well as summoning features. So that's what's going to get us from here to there, to level 3, beginning of level 4 in the next 3 to 4 years. That's great. But when will cars really have no steering wheels and go anywhere, even roads that may be rarely traveled? I believe firmly that this is going to require modification to our existing highway and a city infrastructure. For example, in some cities in China, pedestrians and cars are being separated. The purpose is simply to minimize pedestrians getting hit by cars, thereby making autonomous vehicles launchable. And once you launch, you have more data, and then it gets better and it will beat people in capabilities. In the future, there are many other capabilities. I think autonomous vehicles on the upper left, you see, I believe it can form the core of the next operating system, something as lucrative and powerful as Windows and Android back in their heyday. But when you have autonomous vehicle, you've got all these capabilities that will also power all of the future of robotics. The third area is one I'm most excited about, AI and healthcare. And the fundamental reason is any industry that becomes data-driven will become AI-driven. That has happened with internet. It's happening with financial. But I think what's really happening very rapidly, even without AI, is the digitization of healthcare. That includes, of course, our hospital systems, but also data from wearables, biodata from IVD, multiomics, genetic sequencing, and of course, also extensive blood tests and markers that are coming out everywhere. And AI will integrate all of these disparate data, these heterogeneous data, and help assist doctors in not only diagnosis, but early alerts, treatment, monitoring, long-term care. And all this data on the right-hand side, you see Harvard Medical School showing all the data that's relevant to one's future health improvement or disease prevention or treatment or longevity. And there's no way human doctors can absorb all that data. Human genetic sequencing is about a gigabyte of data. Human doctors can't possibly read it. It's not even comprehensible in a systematic way right now. So AI is the perfect tool that will do that. The applications are many. And I think it's important that as data is being gathered, they're being applied to great areas, but taking care that they fit within the medical practices. I know that IBM Watson had some trouble, even Google, there were some difficulties getting AI and healthcare to combine. Fundamentally, it's a difference between an AI field which measures things by numbers and statistics. So if we save 5% people's lives and 3% died in the process, AI people would say, great, gather more data, do more of that. We're saving lives in aggregate. But in medicine, with Hippocrates' oath, how can you possibly hurt the 3% of people who would not have been hurt with humans at the helm? So these are fundamental issues about using large amounts of data, whether explainability is possible. So there will need to be more understanding and collaboration between the two fields. One very exciting area that you might not expect is using AI to treat longevity as a disease, feeding all the data in, comparing each person with other people of a similar age. That's a regimen I am personally on. And I can tell you that the AI feedback, of course, filtered by a human and given to me about my sleep, eating, exercise, as well as nutrients and medicines that I take, has made my blood look 6 years younger in the past 1 year. So AI really does work. Robotics is an area that's huge in China. And I think China is going to lead the world in robotics because simply China is the world's factory. And being the world's factory with labor costs going up, China is compelled, required, if it wants the economy to keep going, to automate the factories. So on the bottom, you see that places in which automation can happen in the factory includes visual inspection, movement, manipulation, and very delicate grasping and flying. These are our technologies where China is leaping ahead. And beyond that, houses will be in modules. 3D printing will extend manufacturing into healthcare as well as food. And the robots will become self-maintaining probably more towards 20 years, not quite right now, but it will happen over time. A fifth one, which is a little bit different from AI, but somewhat relevant, is the fact that we talk a lot about carbon neutral, about clean energy, but also, well, I'm very optimistic this will happen because the solar energy plus the current lithium battery over the last 10 years has reduced the cost each by over 80%. And it's already basically the cheapest energy in the world. And new technologies will further take solar as well as lithium battery for another 80% reduction for the next 10 years and perhaps for the 10 years after that. New technologies like sodium batteries and using hydrogen and so on, I think we're seeing tremendous progress. Batteries, another area where China has done a lot of amazing things. Most of Tesla's cars are using Chinese batteries by an amazing battery company in China. So I believe what's likely to happen as energy becomes cheaper, first is that we will no longer rely as much on natural resources for energy, but rely on manufacturing driven. And then the manufacturing driven will be automated and AI assisted. So that will lead to a world where energy will be powerful, clean, manufacturing driven. And actually not only will energy be driven by manufacturing, but also vertical farming, 3D printed food. And then the last point, putting all this together, is that we actually can see also a materials revolution in life sciences, which has healthcare implications, but it will also start to take what we currently use as toxic, non-recyclable materials like petroleum and chemicals, going into a science where materials in nature that are basically free, like photons and molecules, can be built one at a time. So again, we go from natural resource driven to manufacturing driven with energy, food, and vegetation. So with all of these factors working together, I think in 20 years, we can look forward to a day where the cost of goods comes down dramatically, because what's in the cost of goods? It's the materials, the energy, and the labor. And all three are becoming much cheaper over time. So it will actually give us an opportunity to wipe out poverty and hunger and usher in the age of plenitude, where people no longer need to worry about day-to-day living. People can have a comfortable life, and we'll have to think about the work ethic that people may shift, and also the opportunity we have as we are liberated from routine work, we can go towards aspirational and creative pursuits. So these are the projections I have in the book, and I hope you enjoy the book. Thank you very much.
Dr. Lee, thank you. This is Steve Buray, the president of Discovery Institute, and our first question is from a gentleman named George Gilder.
Well, you've experienced both economic environments.
Let me make sure the microphone is on.
Is it?
Okay, go ahead, but speak right into it, George, so that he can hear.
You've experienced both the U.S. and China entrepreneurial environments. Do you have any advice for us that, based on China, or any insights about the differences that in your life after Google?
Yes, certainly. Well, I think in my previous book, AI Superpowers, you're all welcome to go to Amazon and get that. I describe what's unique about the China entrepreneurial ecosystem. Very clearly, the US education and the attraction of global immigrants makes US the highest IQ, most creative, most out-of-box innovation, and most tolerant of people who can think different. People like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, who may have more trouble in a more traditional country. That's what US, I think, is tremendously strong in. The China's opportunity comes in threefold. First, China has a huge market, rapidly growing, so many people. Secondly, China has, the young Chinese people for the last 30, 40 years have had such hunger for success that they work incredibly hard, that they are from families with 20, 30 generations of poverty. This is their chance. Their parents expect it, they want it. The hunger, the hard work, the dedication is the second element. I think the third is that in the last at least 20, 30 years, China has had an environment where the entrepreneurial approach has been tenacious. That is winner take all. In relative terms, Silicon Valley is pretty gentlemanly. That is, if you look at the field, let's say food, companies like DoorDash and OpenTable and Yelp and Groupon, and Uber Eats, they peacefully coexist and even cooperate. In China, the approach is this is a gladiatorial fight to the death. Each company will want to own the food industry, and the outcome is a platform emerges. The Chinese food platform called Meituan is worth probably at the height maybe 300 or 400 billion US dollars, much, much larger than the US equivalent. And the convenience is phenomenal. You know, I can order from 3,000 restaurants delivered to my home in usually 10 minutes, at most 30 minutes, and the food is still hot. And the entire network has, everything optimized. So delivery charge is only 60 cents. The cost to the company, which is dramatically higher in the US. And that don't have time to go into the details, but when you have a giant platform, this kind of economies of scale and convenience emerges. So I guess the inputs to the US would be sometimes maybe consider going for the moon. Don't be too complacent. If you look at apps like YouTube or Snapchat or Pinterest, they look the same year after year. They look the same 10 years ago. If you look at a Chinese app, under tremendous competition, they're forced to push new things, understand users, differentiate, grow their user base, add adjacent capabilities. So it's continuous thinking, live under paranoia. So I think Silicon Valley can benefit from a little bit more paranoia, dream big, winner take all kind of thinking. But at the same time, I think still the core strength in the US is the breakthrough thinking, finding the more Steve Jobs, Elon Musk's, and the brilliant scientists, and using the global immigration power, right? I mean, China has the Chinese people, US has people from every country. So I think those are the key things is to use US's natural advantages, all the brain power, but also consult, and the Chinese approaches that seem to have worked in a different way.
Thank you. We have another question.
Kai-Fu, it's Matt McElwain from the Madrona Venture Group. It's good to see you, and thank you for your talk. I really enjoyed it. And I particularly enjoyed the first section around natural language processing and the opportunities that lie ahead. You talk about these competitive worlds. There's this whole world of generative pre-trained models, GPT, you know, what OpenAI has been doing with GPT-3, GPT-4. This feels like a battleground that's just emerging, not just within the world of OpenAI and its backing from your former employer, Microsoft, but Google and others. How do you think about that space? How do you expect it to evolve, including the role that some of the players in China might be investing in?
Yeah. Yes, the natural language capabilities are largely enabled by this self-supervising training from a huge amount of data to create gigantic models from which to fine-tune to particular applications. So we are investing big in this area. So there are a couple of things. One is obviously there is a big advantage to companies that have huge amount of computation power. It can cost $100 million to buy a machine and maybe $20 million to train one time a huge model. So I think companies like Microsoft, Google have an advantage. China has also built these giant models and they work comparably. So that's kind of one good and bad thing packaged together. Another implication for us is we seriously need better computing architecture because GPUs improve 1.5 times a year. NVIDIA is brilliant, but that's all they improve. And the top AI applications year over year require 7 times more computing. So we're completely out of whack. We really need quantum and quantum inspired approaches and also look at these new architectures that combine memory and computation and IPUs and TPUs. We got to do something because we can't get ourselves to a place where only $1 trillion company can afford to train giant models because that's not good for the entrepreneurial or academic world. The last point I would make is I think there is a future for smart companies that can dramatically reduce the size of these giant models and make them commercially viable. And in fact, our most proudest investment this year is in a company called Langboat, and they've reduced the model by 1,000-fold and still beating the original model, thereby making these GPT-3 capabilities are able to run on more ordinary computers. So those are kind of our investment takeaways.
Dr. Lee, thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, I want to say 2 things. First of all, you are always welcome to join us at a future COSM conference in person. We'd love to see you in person next time. But you have joined us virtually, and your staff, Melody, Daniel, and Reese Durden, have been very helpful to us. And so I'm so thankful to you for your time and for your staff, and let's give him a round of applause.